Hello, and welcome here to the fifth episode of Two Things You Don't Talk About. My name is Cody Schroeder, and I'll be your host for this evening. And today, I want to talk about a historical event that happened in the 1930s. In fact, I believe it was 1933. And if you know anything about the time period, you may have guessed what I'm talking about. 1933, yeah, that's the year. Today we're going to talk about the Reichstag incident. So, for those of you who don't know, the Reichstag incident was a arson that was supposedly committed by a man named Martin van der Lubbe of the Reichstag building in Germany, which is essentially the same as the U.S. Capitol building here in the United States, meaning that it housed the the legislative body of Germany. And they had a parliamentary system at the time that had been established during the Weimar Republic in its creation in, I believe, 1919 or 1920, or somewhere very similar to that, right after the fall of the German forces in World War I. And so they had the Treaty of Versailles that was signed by a bunch of politicians. It basically said that Germany was responsible for World War I, and so it had to pay remunerated debts to the other nations. It had to keep its armies below a certain level. It had trade restrictions and a bunch of other sanctions that were imposed on it from the international community. These things ticked off a lot of people, specifically the communists and the socialists, and people who felt like they were treated unfairly, which I think that they probably were. If you look at it, what caused World War I in the first place? The assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And that was between Austria and Hungary. And then all the alliances of Europe got brought into it, and just this whole downward spiral happened. And somehow, Germany took the front and center and was blamed for everything, which isn't fair because they didn't start it, even though they were the last ones left fighting in the end. And sure, there were lots of costs, but that's the cost of going to war and defending yourself sometimes. So, do I think that it's fair that all of these things happened? That their economy was put into shambles? That they had to print money so much that all of it was essentially meaningless in order to pay their debt, and it really broke the power of the first democratic institution in Germany. Now, when I say democratic in this situation, I mean that there is power that was given to the people, and the people established their say in government. I don't mean that it was actually a democracy. It's a democratic republic, similar to America's, but altogether different. It established rights like the freedom of speech, and the freedom of press, and things like that, freedom to assemble, all sorts of freedoms that the German people hadn't really had yet. I mean, they were underneath a pretty strict regime underneath Wilhelm and the former kings. But they were a very hardworking, honest people, lived in brutal conditions, listened to the authorities, just a very robust, strong people. So, they're probably going to get out of it, right? So, they're going through their hard economic times, and their people are down on their luck, and all the things that you would kind of expect from a failed state that's trying to put its feet back on the ground. Now, one thing that I need to tell you about is the actual structure of their government, because that's going to be really important to the story that I'm crafting here. And stick with me if you're not a huge fan of history or World War II or Nazi Germany or the evils of the Axis powers and yada yada, blah blah blah, all the rest of that. There is actually an intellectual point at the end of this story, so just stay with me. But it is necessary for me to tell you how the German government worked underneath the Weimar Republic. There is a House parliamentary system over the 19 territories where the people voted for their different electors or their different representatives to represent them in the House. Now, their parliamentary system worked a lot like Britain's, and where you voted for your people, and there were various different parties that were there. You know, it's not quite like America where we have a two-party system. It's a multiple party system. So you had different factions of political alliances working together in order to consolidate power. And it's supposed to keep things fair, but you'll see how that quickly turns. So, as you will know, Adolf Hitler was a failed soldier, had worked off some jail time from inciting kind of a small incident, trying to he was revolting against the fact that he thought that the people who signed the Treaty of Versailles were traitors. And I think that that's a logical thing to conclude based on what the Treaty of Versailles was, but it was also the only way to keep the German country and German power. It's not like they had a whole lot of chips to bargain with. So deal with the devil and you end up having to deal with the devil, you know? So he ended up serving some time in jail for his insurrection. And then when he got out in 1923, he devoted himself to the German Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazis, as they will be referred to through their acronym throughout history. And in 5 short years, he rose to the top of it and had over 100,000 members, which you would think is a great sum, but it turns out that there was roughly 20 million people in their country at the time. So 100,000 party members isn't huge, but it represents a huge explosion, and that's partly due to the economic situation that had happened. Now, outside of the parliamentary house that they had, which was housed in the Reichstag, there was a president that was also elected by popular vote. This president that's going to be in focus here is named Hindenburg, which is actually how the great blimp or Zeppelin got its name. It was named after this man Hindenburg. Unfortunate disaster, but you'll see that his presidency kind of was too. Now, the president of Germany had the power to disbar his cabinet and his advisors at any time, had the power to disband the Reichstag and call for a new election of the parliamentary house at any time that he felt that political upheaval and chaos or whatnot was running the day. And he had the power to appoint a special position called a chancellor. And the chancellor was responsible for drafting different pieces of legislation and putting it through constantly into the machine and letting the Reichstag argue over the different pieces of legislation, whether or not they would accept it. And he, too, was at the whim and the mercy of the president. So the president of the executive branch had a lot of authority over the legislature as it was set up in the Weimar Republic. So very different from the way that the United States set up its democratic republic. Now, in 1928, the elections that were held proved to have about 2% of the population for the Socialist Party. And then the Great Depression happened all throughout Europe and America, and it really devastated an already bad situation in Germany at the time. And so, with this upheaval, which put about 6 million people out of work, just decimated the economy. And by the way, 6 million people, if you go back to the 20 million people that I said, that's about 30% of the population. was out of work. They did not have a job. They're just burning money to stay alive. Like literally to keep the heat. They were burning stacks and stacks of this paper money, which was essentially useless because they just kept printing money to try and solve their problems, which is part of the reason why they were in such political upheaval. But that caused a very precipitous rise in power for both the National Socialist Workers' Party of Germany and the Communist Party of Germany. The two of them were only dwarfed by the Liberal Party as in terms of membership in the parliamentary houses, and the Liberal Party, I believe, made up something like 24%, whereas the Nazis made up 18% and the Communists made up 10% of the parliamentary house. So nobody had a majority. This political upheaval is going all over the place. But you can see that the rise in inequality and the strenuous social situation created a huge amount of upheaval and an opportunity for the kind of class hustlers that Marxists typically end up being to rise in popularity, and the rhetoric spread far and wide. So we're setting the climate here for what happened. Now, the Spanish flu happened the decade before, but this is something that just decimated life for Germans and Europeans and Americans alike. I don't have to tell you how the Great Depression affected people. I'm sure, if you're here and you're listening to this, you probably know a little something about the history of the world. So, in 1933, let's see, let me just pull up the article here. By the way, the article that I'm pulling up most of my historical information from will be in the description. And it is from the Smithsonian, which is a nationally recognized paper. And part of what we're going to be discussing today will involve what some people would call a conspiracy theory, other people would be called a criminal conspiracy. But it is a debated historical point for the context here. And they, in 1930s, the Nazis allied with some of the other right-leaning faction and got 33% of the vote, which is still underneath a majority. And Hitler was recommended to Hindenburg by a man named Franz von Papen. Franz von Papen was a former chancellor himself, who was part of the Conservative Party, and he believed that they needed to partner with the bourgeoisie, or that the conservative bourgeoisie needed to partner with the Nazi Party in order to take out the communists. Which, I mean, if you know anything about communism, is it seems like making a deal with one enemy to kill another, right? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. But the communists are terrible people too. We'll look at what happened all throughout Russia and China, even today, with China starting to have a more opened up economy, but they're still communists, which is why I always say that the Communist Party and communism is a government structure that facilitates government ownership of all private property, whereas socialism is the economic means of the state having its consolidated property. So one is an economic structure and how to structure things economically in order to make these certain assets benefit all people. It's a redistribution scheme, so that way basically the state is in control of all assets and gets to decide what is fair and how fairness really works. While the other one is a government structure from the top down. It's an authoritarian position that it basically gets to dictate the same thing, but you don't necessarily have to have a socialist economy to have a communist government, and you don't have to have an authoritarian communist government to have a socialist economy. I did a couple of dissertations and papers on that particular theory. I've written many comparison papers over the years about the two. And that's the general take that I get from it. Well, Marxism kind of is the umbrella of both of these concepts put together. A lot of people want to tell me that democratic socialism is a form of government, and I disagree with that. I think what you're talking about there is a democratic government under a socialist economic umbrella, and I think that that's a basically fair way of putting that to paper. So, where was I? Yes, so Hitler was appointed as chancellor by Hindenburg. So, as we discussed earlier, that means that he was writing a lot of the laws and the policies that the Reichstag would oversee and vote on. And in early February of 1933, Hitler used his power as chancellor to directly appoint a lot of Nazis to the political power as honorary and acting enforcements of the state. So they became police officers, and these aren't just police people who happened to have been Nazis. These are regular Nazis being appointed as a de facto police system, and is actually part of the Stormtrooper initiative. So, not exactly the type of people who would be known very well through history. In fact, it's kind of these people, the brown shirts and the Stormtroopers, during this time, the 40,000 people or so that were recruited, that the book Ordinary People was written about. It talks about how the ordinary German men and German people went from being, neighborly, caring people, and became the kind of people that would throw Jewish people on trains and enforce these draconian laws and really become the stormtroopers that you see in Star Wars, shooting innocents and killing people if they didn't obey the laws that were being passed and needed to be enforced. So we have Hitler rising to power in January of 1933, and then in February of 1933, he appoints 40,000 stormtroopers, and he has his people infiltrate the actual police system. So it's not just that the stormtroopers are the ones that carried out all the orders. He actually had people going in and infiltrating the normal police system so that his organization could control them. Now, a week later, there were people who went and raided the Communist Party's headquarters. Now, Hitler and his men claim that they did so in order to recover intel into possible domestic terrorism, and that they had recovered evidence of their plans to blow up or light buildings on fire. So what they did was present these fake documents to the people and started leaking it to the press and things like that, so that way the people of Germany would believe that the communists were involved in conspiratorial insurrection and domestic terrorism. And that sets us up perfectly for the stage of the day that the Reichstag happened. And so this is on February 27th around 9 o'clock. Now some people hear some breaking glass and whatnot, and after the firemen and workers and the police show up and start tackling this fire for a very long time, it caused over $1 million in damage. They found a Dutch construction worker named Vanderloob, Marinus Vanderloob, outside. He's got a bunch of things that to start fires, like fire starters and gasoline and things like that. So, he is charged as a member of the Communist Party, and he is found guilty in a spectacular, just sensationalized trial. Now, this trial also included the head of the Communist Party and a couple of other Communist Party members, and was all because of the suspicion of van der Lubbe being a communist and admitting to being a communist and starting the fire. Now, there's a lot of historians that say that not one person, not just that not one person, only one person would not be enough to light the Reichstag building on fire in the amount of time between 9 o'clock when the things were heard and the police response time and the firefighters arriving. Now, this might be true. In fact, I would say that it is likely true that it would take more than just one person. In fact, a lot of people say that some of the Nazi stormtroopers or the brown shirts probably showed up and committed a lot of the damage within the building as well. So this was something that Hitler used to demonize the Communist Party and get the communists thrown out of the Reichstag, out of the parliamentary system. So the overthrow of power is complete at this point. And what happened was that Marinus van der Lubbe was decapitated in a very public trial. And then Hindenburg died in office, I believe in March of 1933, which wasn't very, very far later. Just double checking here that date. Oh, died in August of 1934. So he went on for another year with Hitler as his chancellor. But yeah, so in February 28th of 1993, Hindenburg signed an article which would enforce Article 48, giving him emergency powers. So he disbanded the freedom of expression, censored the media, put out his own articles, made it so that people couldn't show up and protest, and really shut down a lot of free speech and information dissemination, which is, obviously not good. And during this time, a book came out talking about the Reichstag fire and Hitler terror from one of the communists. This had been translated into 24 different languages and spread across Europe and America, and displayed the brazen nature of the Nazi Party to do this type of a political terrorism. And unfortunately, it seems like they got away with it. On that night when everything was forbidden, the interception of correspondence, legalized phone tapping, suspended of the autonomy of the federal states like Bavaria and things like that. All those things were gone underneath the Article 48. 4,000 people were arrested, including the 81 communist deputies and the people who were in the Reichstag. So you can see that at that point, there was nobody left to stop the Nazis or Hitler. On March 23rd, the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act, which is a partner piece giving the decree to the protection of the people in the state. Enabling Act assigned all legislative power to Hitler and his ministers. Thus, the Chancellor became the universal law, and Hindenburg was his president, who he supposedly answered to, but all of the power basically became consolidated in Hitler in 1934 when Hindenburg died, and that is how he became the ruling power of Nazi Germany. And so you can see how this one incident was a huge linchpin in the Nazis' pull for power, the destruction of a democratic state, as far as the people ruling in Germany, and the suspension of the rule of law and rights that people had only really been afforded for I'd say the better part of 10 years. So I want to take a moment to think about what has been going on the last 4 years, particularly right before Donald Trump was elected President of the United States of America. Let's do a little rising recap here from my memory. I'm sure that there'll be things that I forget, but you can look up everything that I'm going to tell you because it's true. In March of 2016, before the election, when Donald Trump was officially nominated by the Republican Party to be the presidential nominee for the general election, there was already text messages and groups of people going around trying to figure out how to keep him from going into office. At this time, well, it was a little bit before, I'd say probably May or June, we had discovered that Hillary Clinton had used a private internet server in her bathroom at her house that contained her emails, all of them that she used while she was the Secretary of State, many of which had been retroactively classified. That means that Hillary Clinton had broken a Classification Act, which is a huge law regarding the security and the national interest of the United States. So, if you were to violate HIPAA law or violate the National Declassification or the National Classification Act unintentionally, you would be arrested and probably charged for everything that happened. You are not allowed to accidentally take patient files out to your car for any reason whatsoever, bar none, period. You are not to disseminate classified information to non-classified personnel, including the media, which is why a lot of people suspected the FBI and the CIA of leaking classified information in the early parts of President Trump's administration, specifically when it came to private conversations that happened between James Comey and Andrew McCabe. One of the reasons why McCabe was fired before his retirement, and James Comey was fired. And so we have that set up, and we have the weird airfield meeting between Loretta Lynch, which was the acting attorney general underneath President Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton, the husband of the accused, that took place for 23 minutes on the tarmac at JFK Airport. Now, we don't know what happened there. Nobody does. They claim that Loretta Lynch stopped the plane and got on to talk to Bill Clinton about their grandkids and what was going on in their family, because they're old family friends, you know. Even though his wife is under investigation. And that seems like a huge breach of decorum. It just seems like something that would happen out of The Godfather. So, 1 week later, James Comey, who was in charge of looking at it and doing the investigation and recommending nothing, really. Loretta Lynch is supposed to decide whether or not they're going to pursue a criminal investigation and bring up charges. But James Comey recommended that no charges be brought up on the simple fact that Hillary Clinton did not mean for classified information to be disseminated, even though what she did broke every single part of the law. And he went through all the parts of the law that she broke. And so then it was dropped, and it wasn't brought up again. We can go back and look now, and you can see that Hillary Clinton was bankrolling the entire DNC during her election process, her candidacy. She had questions leaked to her from Donna Brazile and other members at CNN, and screwed Bernie Sanders out of his chance at being the general nominee. And Barack Obama knew that she was using that server. In August of 2016, there was a woman named Lisa Page and a man named Peter Strzok who had a conversation talking about a contingency plan to not let Donald Trump be elected. That contingency plan was apparently started an investigation into Russian probes at that point, which came from a dossier that was paid for by Hillary Clinton through Fusion GPS, the same one that was printed by BuzzFeed in December that kicked off the whole fake news thing. CNN started calling everything that Donald Trump tweeted about it fake news, and then it turns out that actually the dossier was fake, and now it became a rallying cry against the mainstream media whenever they lied, manipulated, or presented things that weren't true as if they were true without vetting them. A lot of people would say that Donald Trump created a cult of personality and a conspiracy theory based around this fake news rally. I would say that the mainstream media destroyed their credibility, and so fake news became the norm because there was nothing to challenge the establishment on their narrative. Everything that they put out was unanimous. It was the exact same as everybody else. So people started to notice this and question a lot of what was being told to us. Now, during this whole thing, the election happened, and Joe Biden and a few other members were caught talking about how they wanted to get Michael Flynn in a trap, and they were going to wiretap Carter Page. And they used the FISA system and lies from the FBI that they knew that the Fusion GPS dossier was paid for and most likely false. And they used that information to get a FISA warrant to tap Carter Page's phone line. And Joe Biden unmasked all of the other private citizens on these phone calls, including Donald Trump, in order to spy on that campaign and what was going on. And this is the same Joseph Biden that is now the president, the presumed president-elect of the United States of America. So shortly after the election, all of the information started being disseminated, and obviously before the election, the Huma Abedin laptop thing happened where there was more emails that needed to go on, and James Comey had to reopen the investigation, and Hillary Clinton blames James Comey on that loss of her election, and that kind of is what happened. I mean, but if you look behind the scenes, there's a whole bunch of cheating going on. I wouldn't necessarily call it voter fraud or maybe voter suppression, just because of the way that the information was coming out. But there was definitely a lot of things working behind the scenes that would, to me, constitute some sort of a crime. I don't know if it would be treason, conspiracy to commit election interference. I don't know what you would call it. But then everything started working really weird. A lot of leaks came from the intelligence departments, from the CIA and the FBI. You find moles and all that. There's a 2 or 3 year investigation into Trump-Russia allegations that are going on, despite the fact that what started it all was a lie. Sure, Trump said good things about Vladimir Putin. I don't like that either. Okay, Vladimir Putin is a evil dictator who's killed his own people and who has done a lot of really nasty things in his life. And I don't think that it's okay to be buddy-buddy with him or, Kim Jong-un. But I will admit that we were more aggressive. We funded our allies more. We gave more weapons to places like Ukraine. And And there's a litany of other things we did against Russia and against North Korea that have made our relationships with them better because they're under a better control. That includes things like the death of the Soleimani in Iran, where everybody said we're gonna go to World War III with Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and that never happened. And they all backed down. We tried to make peace with the Taliban, and we're still trying to do that. We made peace with multiple Middle Eastern nations and Israel, which is unprecedented and unheard of. So there's a lot of really cool things that have happened, and a lot of that happened in the last few months. But the whole Russian probe went on, and people were making up things over and over again, from Adam Schiff, to Peter Swalwell. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page were dismissed from the FBI due to conduct problems. So there's a lot of things that happened in the intelligence community that I don't think should have happened, and I don't think are fair to pin on the President of the United States. At the end of the entire thing, the Mueller investigation comes out and says that it doesn't seem like anything illegal has happened except for maybe investigation interference, even though everybody seemed cooperative except for Donald Trump was advised not to go into an interview without a lawyer or really an interview at all and just to answer written questions, which is smart because if you go back to the beginning part of this in January, that's what they got Michael Flynn on, which has now been exonerated and then pardoned by the United States president. Thankfully, there was zero reason for him to go down for talking to Andrei Kislyak when he was already in transition and talking to them on behalf of their ambassador status and the fact that he was under the impression that they were talking about before he was put into his position. I think that it is unfortunate how long and how much money we wasted on the Russian probe because the mainstream media wasn't being forthcoming with information or accurate. And I think that it's all right that we exhausted as many avenues as we did, but after 3 years, if they hadn't found anything, how is it that people still believe that he stole the election? Like that's 3 years of looking at every single avenue. No crime came up. Not one. Not for tax fraud, not for embezzlement, nothing. Because you could probably be sure that if he had committed something as obvious as that they would have figured it out by now. And then, the next thing that happens, after all of this, and during that time, the House and the Senate were cowards and they didn't pass anything because they were afraid of being called racist or whatever. I don't know. So all the establishment guys were kind of against Trump, and sometimes they worked with him, and sometimes they didn't. And people like Jeff Flake quit over Trump, and good riddance to him. I'm from Arizona, and I don't like Kristen Sinema, and I really, really don't like Mark Kelly. But I'd rather have an enemy that I know than a snake in the woods. So after all the Mueller investigation was done, people still pushed out that he was a Russian puppet, and then came into new information they decided they were going to go after with a Ukraine hoax. Now they claimed, and Adam Schiff once again at the helm, reading a fake transcript that made Donald Trump sound like a mob boss. You hear, I'm going to make you do this, and you tell me this information I want to hear, otherwise don't contact me again. You hear? Ha! And that's all bullocks. It was mostly about Russia and what they needed, and then he asked if there was any information that he could get on what happened during the previous administration, who was, by the way, bankrolled by George Soros and his Open Society project after the weird sort of pseudo grassroots movement that was funded by him to elect certain officials and then put certain people into power. Now, through this phone call and its investigation, we found out that nothing happened. Nobody was pushed to do a quid pro quo. All the people who came to support evidence were directly asked questions under oath in which they either would not answer or answered in the negative, that there was no quid pro quo, that there was no understanding of that, and that the only reason why funding was delayed for a month, and nobody knew that, Ukraine didn't know that, the only reason why funding was delayed for a month was because they wanted to look at it from a military perspective and have a report written to see whether or not the funds were going where they were supposed to, and if it was in America's best interest to continue to fund at that level. It was agreed that it was, and the money went forth without anybody even knowing that there was a delay. Now, during this investigation, what did come up was that Joe Biden, once again, the same guy who is the presumptive president-elect of the United States, he was caught doing a quid pro quo in a live interview where it was him bragging about having the investigator of Burisma, a shady oil company which had been using a Turkish bank to launder money in the millions for whatever reason. Whether it was because China was paying them and they were just a source, or if it was any other kind of shady business. I'm not really certain what the reason behind laundering millions and billions of dollars through Turkey is. But I do know that it required the use of Hunter Biden and another gentleman from the same kind of circles. I can't remember exactly whose son it was, but one of his close friends peddling influence to, once again, the same presumptive president-elect, Joseph Biden. And you know that it worked because he continued to get paid. You know, he continued to talk about the big guy and how he was going to get in touch with him and how he keeps taking a bunch of money and whatnot from the deals. This happened when he was in China, and it's happened in the Ukraine. And Joseph Biden's brother did similar things in Iraq with a development contract. So there's a lot of that going on in the family. A lot of people got really rich. So there was never an investigation into what Joseph Biden might have done. Just like people wanted to investigate Stormy Daniels, where consensual things happened, it just didn't look good, and he paid her off to not talk about it, which is okay. Everybody knows that you slept with a lot of people. You cheated on every single one of your wives. You know, I don't know why you thought that it was important to pay her off, which isn't illegal, to give somebody money to stay silent. Not illegal. Wrong, but not illegal. And I don't think cheating on your wife is right either, but also not illegal anymore. But so during all of this, Tara Reid came out with a credible rape allegation for Joe Biden when he started running that nobody took seriously, even though the whole Brett Kavanaugh scandal happened, and we're just going to demonize him based on Christine Blasey Ford's testimony with no evidence. It could have been anybody. There's no house. There's none of the four corroborative witnesses she said would have known, said anything about it. They all said it didn't happen. There was no party. I don't know what you're talking about. And that includes people who've been friends with her for a long time. And the only evidence that she has is a story that she told to her husband in 2001 and to her therapist in 2008. Where the details were widely different. Very different amounts of people and all sorts of things like that. And the only reason that she remembers it, or that she brought it up apparently in 2001, was because he was elected to a federal judge position underneath the George W. Bush's administration. And this supposedly happened in the 1970s. So it's a long time ago, and there's been no criminal conduct of the Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh ever since. So we had to dismiss it based on there being no evidence. And so there's a lot of doubt in her story, and that's the only reason. Now, I'm not saying that she wasn't horribly, assaulted or anything like that, but I am saying that as of right now, there is not enough proof to legally secure a rape allegation against somebody, and I think that it's important that we uphold we uphold the will of the law. Because if we can't do that, then anytime anyone's accused and they're guilty until proven innocent, I think that's wrong. That is fascist and totalitarian. Despite the fact that everyone calls Donald Trump a fascist, he rolled back regulations, gave up presidential power, didn't take emergency powers during coronavirus like he could have. Like, there's a lot of things that a fascist would have done that Donald Trump did not do. So I just think that it's unfair to give that characterization to him or to give him the Nazi characterization. But hold on for a moment. I know you all are waiting, wondering why I'm going through this process. This is important. So after that, and after the Stormy Daniels thing, and then after the impeachment of a president for something he didn't do, but his opponent, his political opponent, did do. And that political opponent won the nomination of his party, despite some craziness going on in Idaho during their primary elections. Something shady happened. They used a platform that was developed by Pete Buttigieg's cousin or uncle from a group called Shadow Inc., which is a highly dubious name, where it was the first time that they used this voting data at different polling locations, and there was some irregularities that happened that caused the entire election to be put on hold for 4 or 5 days. It made a lot of people really curious. And Pete Buttigieg won that state, only that state, by flying colors. And then Super Tuesday happened, and Joe Biden won a lot of states despite not really doing very well up until that point. Now, I think if Elizabeth Warren had dropped out and they didn't cheat during these primaries, which is a possibility that some people have reported on, I think that Bernie Sanders might have got the rightful nomination again. So I think he might have been cheated out of it twice. Now, all of this is conjecture based on possible evidences and things that happened. And I'm not certain that any of this happened with the election scamming here. But I do know that it was the only time Pete Buttigieg won, and that it was with technology developed by his uncle. Well, yeah, his uncle owned huge assets in it anyways. But developed by a guy who tried to prove voter fraud in the Georgia election during the 2016 election with Kemp versus Stacey Abrams, by creating a voting platform that allowed for voter fraud and manipulation, and tried to use that as evidence that that's what happened. Which Stacey Abrams and Hillary Clinton still go out there and claim that they won their elections, which I think is dubious and sows division in the country. All the things that people are saying that Donald Trump was doing while legally pursuing his options as far as the election goes. Now, Hillary Clinton and a lot of her electors also contested the election, which Republicans allowed because it's constitutionally legal. There is zero things wrong with contesting an election if you think that something happened. And they brought up voter fraud, and they brought up election interference. They had the huge trial that went on. And, nobody said that they shouldn't have been allowed to do the things that they had to do. But we did say that maybe 3 years and this huge witch hunt was a little excessive. So now we come to the whole COVID crisis after Trump was impeached for nothing. And all the Democrats have shut down their states and made things really difficult. Remember, we're going to shut down for 2 weeks to flatten the curve while we get prepared for the things that had to happen. Trump made sure that everybody had enough ventilators and masks In fact, Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York, was saying that he didn't receive any, and then they found a huge load of them in a warehouse. And Trump said, "Yes, we got those out to you. Do you need more?" They had a couple of medical ships arrive in the different bays that were never used. A lot of hospitals never came close to full capacity. Even still, they're not really coming to full capacity. If you remember, all the nurses were doing all the TikTok stuff because they didn't have enough work to do during the COVID pandemic. Which, if you were to say that the hospitals are being blown out and people are dying all over the place, and this is 100% necessary, that wouldn't have happened. I'm not saying COVID isn't real. I'm not saying that it isn't killing people, and I'm not saying that it doesn't spread fast and hit hard and all those things. I believe I've had COVID. However, it is not killing people in the numbers that it's saying. In fact, children are almost it's unheard of for them to die. I think 21 people under the age of 18 have died. And it seems like children don't spread it from all the data that we've collected. The ones who are the most at risk are nursing homes and the elderly, which at least 3 governors, people claim 5, but at least 3 governors, Gretchen Whitmer, Andrew Cuomo, and Gavin Newsom from California, they all put sick people into nursing homes and killed a whole slew of the elderly population, which is, I don't know, evil. So that's where a lot of the numbers come from. In fact, if you take the numbers from those 3 states and you remove just those who died in the nursing homes, which doesn't include all of them because they classified the elderly who died, got it in the nursing homes but died in the hospital differently, it brings down our rates from being like the 4th highest or the 1st highest in per capita all the way down to like the 28th. Like it severely curtails the amount of deaths that we had. So I blame those 3 governors in particular for our this narrative. And then the mainstream media doesn't report on any of this stuff. And that's why people call them fake news, is because they lie and they lie and they lie about a lot of things. And it's not just that. Adam Schiff and Peter Strzok lied too. And they all claim still that Trump is in the pocket of Russia. And it came out in the last couple of months during this whole pandemic thing where Trump had gotten peace with the Middle East and allowed people to keep their rights and didn't curtail that, and have tried to fight against some of these shutdowns and uphold people's rights in the big tech platforms where everybody is being banned and shut down, and trying to repeal parts of 230 so that way people are more free, and making it an open platform, instead of having these people basically act like publishers and decide what can and can't go on their website. So it's not an open forum. It's basically a publishing company. So if you're going to decide what is printed on your media, then you are responsible for the things that people say. If you are not going to decide what is on your media, then it should be an open platform. And there is no such thing as hate speech in the United States. We have free speech. And so there's the truth and there's lies. And the people who believe in and value the truth should put forward the truth. And the people who believe in lies should be able to spread their information. And the truth should win. People should go out and go do their work and go do their homework and be diligent. And we should be able to figure out the truth. And this discussion should be able to happen everywhere. So we did find out this year that China owns 80% of Hollywood, including Legendary Productions, 53% of Disney, so the ABC, and there are a communist spy named Fang Fang was sleeping with what's his name, Mr. Stalwell, and that there are connections between Hunter Biden and Joseph Biden in China, and that there's a lot of weird Chinese connections going on between the United States government and our politicians and our businesses. In fact, there is a professor of economics in China that went on the record to say that they have the good old boys in the United States government and that they've been paying off Wall Street and companies since 1977. And after the economic collapse, they reached out into the Obama campaign into different politicians, and since 2008 have been buying politicians as well as land. We have it on record that Hillary Clinton sold a bunch of uranium to Russia. So there's a lot of that going on. So now we have foreign interference from China that is involved in the last political campaigns and elections. We have that in big tech, and now big tech in the finance industry, which has been admitted to be in the pocket of China by Chinese agents, and that the FBI has become corrupt and infested with deep state agents who are either out for power or part of the same Chinese initiative. People like McCabe and Strzok and them, who were leaking information and working against the United States president. We now have a pretty clear picture of a few things that had happened. The mainstream media did not look at the Hunter Biden laptop, as they said that it wasn't important before the election. And then a month or two afterwards, now they admit that it is important, and there is an actual investigation going into not only tax fraud and tax liabilities on that money, but possible criminal conspiracy charges based on working with foreign governments, which will probably be dropped because Joseph Biden is going to be the head of the United States going forward, it looks like. So that's unfortunate, but that's where the thing lines up. And now we get to the meat of the issue. After all of the dissemination of information, the suppression of information, things that you weren't allowed to share on Facebook and Twitter and all these other things, we have the crazy part. Whew. All of the evidence, all of the different lawsuits that came to the court did not even get heard. They were all thrown out either for filing issues or for lack of chain of command or timing issues, things like that. Things that really... filing issues, okay, one thing granted. A party not being affected, okay, that's another thing. I mean, we're all Americans. I think that our vote should have been affected no matter what, but a constitutional case being brought forth, or a case of voter suppression or things like that, should be heard by somebody. But every single judge threw it out, despite the fact that when Hillary Clinton did it, they heard it. And all of the electors had their votes cast and everything like that, and then they opened it up on the 6th. And some of the legislators stood up to contest it, which is within their right and has happened before. In fact, every single time a Republican wins the presidency, this happens. People contest electors. In this case, 140 people in the House and I believe 8 senators, 4 or 8 senators, something like that, including Ted Cruz and Josh Halsey, stood up to contest the election. Now, on the 6th, a huge rally of about, they looked like it could be close to 500,000 people, maybe 1 million. I don't know. There was a huge number of people who came to protest the fact that their voice wasn't heard in the court. Mike Pence said that their voice would be heard, that their day in court would come, and it would happen on the 6th. President Trump went out there to make a speech, and during that speech, a few hundred people decided to storm the Capitol, kind of like they did with storming Area 51. And this has been talked about for a couple of days on a couple of blogs. The Capitol Police was warned about it, and they still only had like 5 or 6 guards there before the National Guard was militarized by President Trump. Now, there were some people who said that the National Guard was militarized by Vice President Pence, which is illegal and did not happen. That's misinformation. Now, a lot of people are saying that it was only Antifa members, and while there were a lot of Antifa members, including the guy with the horns and his friend with the beard next to him, which you see in a lot of pictures being from the Philadelphia Antifa, also taking pictures inside of the Capitol building while posting to Philadelphia Antifa's page. It couldn't all have been them. And the one lady who unfortunately was killed while trying to breach the Capitol was a Trump supporter, and there's no denying that. And I don't think that the police, like I said before, did the wrong thing. I think that this was the wrong thing to do, breaking into the Capitol. And I think that, like I said, it could be a natural event that was just 100% organic, but I think it's likely that one of these Antifa members or a group that was counter-protesting and started to incite some of the violence, especially since we've seen this group of people incite violence all across the country the entire summer, and we've seen people incite that and call for violence and say, burn this mother to the ground, and these people are angry and they deserve to be angry, and we can rebuild, but we can't take back people's lives. And meanwhile, they're all ignoring people like David Dorn, who were killed by these protesters. So this happens. And at the same time that's happening, President Trump is actually giving his speech that people are saying incited violence, which is insane to me, because he said we're going to peacefully march over there and we're going to protest and stand our ground and fight for what's right. Which literally peaceful in that sentence. So I don't see the argument that people are saying for inciting violence and inciting insurrection. It's just altogether wrong. And I don't have any patience for it. Look up the words yourself. Look up the context. If you can find that as an incitement to violence, then you're insane, and you deserve to be locked up. Yeah, that's right, Nancy. I said it. And then people like Nancy Pelosi decide that they're going to say that Trump is dangerous, and I needed to meet with this person to talk about nuclear codes, which doesn't make any sense because Trump has had the power for the nuclear codes the entire time, and what is he going to do? Bomb DC? You guys are insane. And I don't think anybody would do it even if you tried to authorize that. On top of all this, with the communist spy thing going nowhere, and then Mike Pence saying that that we're not going to see the evidence. We're not going to have hearings on this. We're going to count all the electoral votes, even though the people objected. And so we didn't get our day in court. Mike Pence lied to us. Now, all the people who stood up and said that we should hear the evidence on these things are being targeted. They all got kicked off of various platforms. Josh Halsey's book is no longer going to get published, and things like that. And we're seeing as Parler lost all of its stuff because of this incitement to violence reason, right? Something that has been completely fabricated. We saw the president get impeached in the House again, a second time within 1 year that he's been impeached for no reason. I mean, he's supposedly out soon. And then we have a senator on Twitter saying that President Trump is going to be out, so he's no longer really a threat. What really is the big threat is the following he's left behind. It looks like we need a cleansing, because that's not freaking scary at all. It's getting crazy out there. So to the crux of all that's happened, showed that there was an infiltration in law enforcement, especially in the FBI, the DOJ, and the CIA. I showed that the brown shirts have been mobilized and have been able to commit violence and whatnot. It's all been reasonably done. Now they're calling the conservatives a dangerous domestic terrorist group, and they were saying that we would burn everything down, which we hadn't done. We didn't do anything violent. Even the people who went into the Capitol were just kind of walking around. I think the worst thing that happened was Nancy Pelosi's laptop was stolen. It's a shame. It should not have been stolen. Now, if there's anything untoward or evil in that laptop, it should come out. However, ill-gotten fruit and all that, yada yada, just drop it off at the FBI. Maybe they'll do a search. Maybe not, because they didn't care about the Hunter laptop for almost a year. So, I don't know. We got all that going on. We got the questionable things happening around the election. We got the courts being tied up. We have the destruction of the free press and the freedom to gather and the freedom of speech and all of these kinds of things. and now we have the sensationalized trial going on. It's only a matter of time until we're all kicked out of the public sphere. Some guy gets his head put on a pike, and the Nazis consolidate power, or I don't know, maybe they're all Chinese puppets. Maybe China comes in. Who knows? But the socialists and the crazy far left people who are in power are mirroring what happened in Nazi Germany. Instead of the Nazis partnering with the right, though, the far left progressives and the socialists and the communists all together came in for the Liberal Party and the centrists. And they've bought all the news media. All of Hollywood is under their thumb because Hollywood doesn't have any values. They just mirror what they think is popular. The tech platforms have gone under everybody's wing, and the financial industry has decided to help. Stripe and other card payment people have stopped processing cards for conservatives. Deutsche Bank said that they're no longer going to do loans for Donald Trump, and Blackwater has 5, 6 high-level members in Joe Biden's office, cabinet, campaign, advisors, different places. So it's looking like a crazy world. Keep your ear to the grindstone, people. I'm not going anywhere. Even if they get rid of me, I'll find a place. Like I said, I'm going to get a camera and I'm going to keep doing this. A lot of this is my opinion and a lot of this is fact. You can tell the difference. I give you dates and things that happened, and then I tried to clarify when things were me reaching conclusions, such as with the Shadow Inc. And the last thing I want to tell you is that Dominion servers don't count votes individually. They count them on a weighted percent, so that way you can decide whether or not votes count to a certain percent or not. They also have things where certain percentages of votes that are cast go to the other parties and stuff like that. They'll switch through third parties and then back out to the other party. This is the same voting system that was used in Venezuela for their elections and other kinds of corrupt elections like that. So, also, if you look at who owned it and how it was developed, you'll find some shady connections to different politicians and things like that. And that's just a fact too. Go ahead, look them up. In fact, Nancy Pelosi and a couple others before the election were saying that these shouldn't be used in elections because they're not safe. And they were hooked up to the internet. That's been proven by now. Like, there's a bunch of crazy things that have happened. Look it up. Don't take my word for anything. I want you to always do your own research. You're smart. I trust you. But yeah. We got a fight ahead of us, guys. In the next podcast, I'll tell you what I think that we should do. My name is Cody Schroeder. It's been fun. I hope that you like, share, subscribe. Have a good time. I'll keep getting better. Let me know what you want to see happen differently. Let me know if you have a topic in mind. I'm really looking forward to creating this community. I love you all. Have a wonderful day. Bye. God bless.